Hello everyone. Let's look at in this particular lecture how do we plan a user research. So our today's learning outcomes will be to formulate a clear actionable research objective which will be very deeply tied to the design decision that we want to make. We will select the right research method based on the product stage and the constraints that we have. We will also see how to plan the participant recruitment and ensure that there is representativeness of the sample. Then we will create a complete research protocol from objectives to an action plan. So let's get started. So why do you think it is important to plan your research? Let's look at an example. So let's say I have two different options for bookshelf and I want to understand which design would people like to have. Now, if you look at both these particular design, they do not look like something which is suitable for small houses. So if I do not plan to get the right kind of participants who have enough space in their houses to install these bookshelves, then I will not get the right kind of information. Similarly, you can see the number of books that are there. So I need to have these participants who love books. I also might have to show them on the actual space, because you can see option B, it is not very simple option. People will have questions. How am I supposed to stack my books? How am I supposed to remove my books? So without really feeling how they are supposed to do that, it is very difficult for them to make a particular judgment just by looking at a picture. Pictures can also be very deceptive in nature. You can clearly see in the option B. You can see over here on the top, I have put the books in a certain manner, and here they are in a certain manner. Technically they are not, it is not possible to have the books like that. Some users might understand that, others might not understand that. So it is very important that we do proper planning. So without planning, you might end up recruiting the wrong kind of participants. You might also ask vague, unfocused questions. So even if I look at my previous example, let's say you can see both of them are AI generated images, and it is a very good idea to use this in the very early phases of design in order to understand what is people's perception about a bookshelf. However, if I do not know that this is my purpose, if I did not plan it, I might not put the questions in the right context, and as a result people will see both of them are AI generated. The second one does not look like how the books have to be actually placed over there. So they will naturally say option A is better because option B is not feasible. So even if you created an image which is like option B, where putting the books is not feasible the way it has been shown, it is still possible to do at a conceptualization phase with that research if you formulate your questions the right way. So the data that does not answer the key question should not be put into there, and if you do not plan, that might enter. Stakeholders lose trust in your research if you have your research in a very chaotic. So with right planning, you will be able to take care of all these different tasks. So in order to do this right planning, we have a 6-step framework which we are supposed to follow. So the first one is, as you had seen in our previous lecture, for any particular research, start with defining the object, then you choose the right kind of method, then you recruit the right kind of participants, the right number of participants, you establish the design protocol of the research, then you prepare the material, then you after the data collection is done, you do the analysis. However, even before you go for data collection, your plan for analysis should already be in place. So let's start with the step 1, which is define the research objectives. So the right questions needs the right objective. So a good research objective is specific. Let's take the example. I want to understand why 40% of the users abandon the checkout at the payment step and what alternatives they expect over there. So now this is a very specific question. Why it is specific? Because I know what exactly do we need to learn. I want to learn why this 40% of users are abandoning the checkout at the payment step. And I want to learn what alternatives they are expecting at this. So I am very specific. It should be actionable. So will the answer change what we build? It should be also bounded. scope is narrow enough to do the study. If you have a very broad scope, so let's say I want to do a user research which tries to understand the complete experience of people going through a particular e-commerce platform, that is a very broad objective. So try to have a specific, actionable and bounded objective. Then you will try to map it to the design space. So am I interested in the discovery phase, analysis phase, evaluation or validation phase? So if I am in the discovery phase, my need is to understand what unmet needs exist in this space. So let's say I want to create a new kind of e-commerce website where the experience is so amazing that no user abandons their cart at checkout. So I want to discover why people do this abandoning in other carts. So then I am in the discovery phase. However, let's say I already have my e-commerce website and I know that 40% of the people do this action, and I want to analyze how do users currently solve this problem, or giving specific example to this e-commerce website. So I know 40% users abandon this, and I want to understand why do they do this and what alternatives they expect so that they wouldn't have done it. If I was in the evaluation phase, can users complete the task in under 2 minutes? So there is some kind of so I am trying to evaluate over here, and I will put a evaluation criteria. So here in this case, okay, under 2 minutes. Or you might have seen in many e-commerce websites, they will also, if you abandon your cart, it will within couple of minutes send you a message again that you had some awesome products on your cart and you forgot to check them out. They are running out very fast. So to create this need for emergency of doing and checkout, so they will try different kinds of messages to see which kind of messaging is most powerful. Different kinds of user segments can also be created on the basis of this. So that brings us to validation. Does the redesign reduced error by 30%? So let's putting in this emergency situation that, oh, my products are running out very fast, but if this message was given to you right within 5 minutes of you abandoning the cart or next day of you abandoning the cart, which one had a higher result of people coming back and doing the checkout? So this is how I map my objectives to this different phases of my design requirement. The next stage is I will be choosing the right research method. So if you need to explore unknown needs, then in that case the best way of doing it will be interviews or ethnographic research. So here I go for qualitative data collection. The effort can be medium to high depending on your context, depending on how many people you want to reach to, what is the diversity of your user target. However, this is a very rich way of collecting data because you can know a lot of things about your user. So let's say in the middle of the night I am not feeling sleepy, or my brain is restless, and that is why I am just going and browsing over e-commerce site, and actually I never intended to buy anything. So that might be the reason and not anything else, and in that case you really have to think what you can do. The design decisions changes. Now I might also have a need that I want to validate at scale. So I might have done some kind of an interview and I know that there are 5 different categories of users. I have categorized them on the basis for the reason why they abandon their cart. Now I want to say which these 5 categories equally valid category when I look at all my users at scale, or whether there are 1 or 2 more dominant categories. So on the basis of my previous research, I can conduct some surveys or A/B testing. Here I am trying to gather quantitative data, and I will have to recruit a lot of people, and since this kind of data collection happens more online and requires less time and effort from the researcher, so I can say that this is a lower medium effort task. However, a lot of effort goes in trying to identify the right kind of users to answer this question. Then I can think about testing the usability. So in this case I can gather both qualitative and quantitative data, and I will do usability testing to do it. So I can try different kind of options, different kind of messaging, and see what is the better usability of either of them. I can also have some need like to understand the context. In this case, I might try to see, can I observe people or can I do contextual inquiry when they are trying to browse through e-commerce, and then at the point that they abandoned, what was it that the reason that they abandoned. I will be collecting qualitative data. However, observation or contextual inquiry constantly requires the need of the researcher to be with the respondents. As a result, this is a very high effort methodology, but again, like my previous methodology of exploring the unknowns through interviews and ethnographic, the qualitative data collection, it is very fruitful because I get to know rich data about why and what. Now I might be interested in understanding, is it a problem with my information architecture? Was it that the right kind of information when the product will be delivered was not available right at the very beginning when somebody put that thing into the cart? Only when they went to check out, they realized, the product will not be delivered to me at the time that I want. Or maybe I was putting these products onto my cart and I didn't know right at the beginning that it was deliverable to my pin code or not, and I put them all in, and then at checkout I realized that they are not deliverable, and so I had no option but to abandon my cart. So these kind of information, whether, so you might have placed those information on your product description page also, but people were not able to figure it out because the information architecture was not right. So you can figure out these kind of problems by doing card sorting, wherein you can bring in users and you can tell them to arrange the different elements which need to go inside a particular interface and understand where people logically think these information regarding pin code or the date of delivery should be available in order for them to less abandon their cart at checkout. Then let's say I want to redesign my entire e-commerce experience by involving my stakeholders. So then you can select a co-create with users, so different kinds of participatory methods. Again, this is a very high effort method because just one session is not going to help you. You will have to repeat the session multiple times by bringing in similar kind of profile users or conducting the same thing in different geographies and collect a lot of qualitative data. Whenever you collect a huge quantity of qualitative data, it is a very high effort process, even in the analysis phase where you have to analyze all that qualitative data and try to make sense out of the data that you have collected. So you have to choose the right method depending on certain key factors. What is the timeline in your project? How much money do you have in your project? What are the skills of your team members? And do you have access to users? How many users do you have access to? And what project stage you are in? Then the third step is about recruiting the participants. So here we are trying to define our participants profile that we need. That definition has to happen in terms of basic demographics, which is about age, location, maybe tech literacy also. Then their behavior, which is about how frequently they use something, what is their purchase history of similar products. You might also have to have certain filters around the attitudes. So whether these are early adopters or they are skeptics. If you are looking at the adoption of a sustainable product, you might also have to look at their attitude towards sustainability and owning sustainable products. You have to look at different kinds of context. So what environment the product will be used, what kind of devices are going to be used in conjunction with it, what kind of social setting is going to go. So in order to do this, you can always have a screener questionnaire which filters the candidates against the criteria which are important, and then you get the right kind of participants. How many and where to find them depends on the method that you select. So interviews you can manage with 5 to 15 participants, but if it is usability testing, you need like minimum 5 to 10 participants, more the better. Surveys require a lot of participants, 100 plus, and depending on the analysis methodology that you want to use, you might also need more than 1,000. In A/B testing, usually it is recommended to use 1000 plus per variation. There are several recruitment channels. It might be social media, user panels. You can also intercept recruitments. You can also do some recruitment of these participants. You can also look at your customer database and recruit them. You can also recruit them through professional networks. So Airbnb recruited their hosts through the Craigslist in their early days, and then they also did this guerrilla recruiting when budget was limited for them. The fourth step, it is about designing your protocol. So we will be using this framework, the AEIOU framework, in order to design my research protocol. In AEIOU, A stands for activities, E for environments, I for interactions, O for objects, and U for users. So we will use this as a checklist kind of a thing. So let's look at each one of them in detail. So the first two things of AEIOU, which is activities and environment. Activities, it is goal directed action. So it can be task sequences or workflows, the workarounds and shortcuts or pain points, and the frequency and duration of task. So if you look at this particular image over here, in order to start this washing machine, this particular person has to load all these clothes inside the washing machine. This person has the option to use a basket to do that, or might also put all the clothes load on top of the washing machine and then slowly put these clothes inside. He might have to also use certain kind of detergents and conditioners and so on. The person might have washer and dryer. They might also have another separate dryer. They might also have some cupboards in the same location wherein they will fold the clothes and keep it. So when I am doing at the activities and environment, activities are all the goal directed actions that I am interested in, and environments are the places where these activities occur. So the layout of the whole space where this activity is happening, you can see that in this particular space I have my detergents and everything. I have some cupboards where I will go and put in my clothes. Maybe I have some more tools over here. This is the whole environment. This person has set up this environment for their laundry. I can also see that this person has a very large laundry space. So the environments are where the activities occur, the layout of that space, the lighting, the kind of noise levels or other disturbances, digital versus physical workplaces, how the space shapes the behavior. Then comes the interaction and objects in the AEIOU method. So interactions are with the people and the objects in that particular environment. So people might be communicating while doing it. So let's say if there was a toddler also over here, so maybe this man would be communicating with the toddler as well while doing this activity. This activity might be also an aided task. So this person might be telling another person, can you please get me the detergent? So all sorts of communication with another person if involved, and all sorts of interaction that he is doing with the machine's interface. So let's say he has to press these buttons, make a choice between the right kind of operations that he wants. He might have to choose the right kind of detergent. He might have to do a segregation of the clothes. So these are all the interactions he is doing with the objects. The objects are all the tools and artifacts that he is using. So the basket is one of the tool that he is using. The top of the washing machine is one of the tool. The detergent bottles, the way they are designed, their handles, they are all tools. So they are all devices, screens, hardware in use. They might be meant for the same purpose, or they might have been improvised by the user to be used in this particular context. So you have to study how objects enable or hinder the task. Now comes to the last part of it, which is the users. And we will be seeing who all are the users. We will be looking at their roles, behaviors, preferences. So there comes the importance of the demography, their background. So the whole situation will change if I put a younger man over here or a younger woman over here, or let's say I try to put a teenager who is also cleaning their clothes or the entire family's clothes, or if I put in a illiterate household help who does this particular job. So the users, their roles, their behavior and preferences with respect to the demography and their background, the emotional state that they might be in, and the different kind of body languages they have, the expertise level that they have with the product that they are interacting, the kind of confidence that they have. So these are my checklist. So what I will be doing is I will try to make questions around activities. What are they doing? Environments, where it is happening, interactions, with whom or what, the objects, using what kind of tools, and the users who is involved. So after I have prepared that checklist, now I will prepare my material. So this will be around preparing an interview guide which can be shared by all the interviewers, or even if there is a single interview, is still a good idea to have a good interview guide. These will be the questions, the warm-up protocols that you will be following. So before any interview starts, you're supposed to say certain things to people. Now, if you say different things to different people, then it also has an impact. So let's say if it was very hot today outside and somebody comes in for an interview, and the first question that I ask them is, oh, today is very hot, are you comfortable? That's a normal way to ask it, but that might also result into biasing your questions. Let's say your questionnaire was to understand the effect of the air conditioner, whereas you conducted the same interview on another day where the weather was pretty pleasant and the person walked in and you did not have the same warm-up prompt. So it is always a good idea to give a well thought of warm-up prompt, which are essential to build the rapport but should not adversely affect one interview to another interview. Then you should also have follow-up probes, for which also you should set up the guidelines. Keep the questions open-minded, that's the benefit of an interview, and avoid leading questions. We will discuss more about them in detail when we go to how to design the interview questionnaire. You should also have the screener survey so that you can select the right kind of participants. Always have a consent form. Without consent, never conduct any kind of user research. Certain organizations, and even if you are trying to publish your work, requires you to mandatorily take permissions from institutional bodies to conduct these user surveys. More on to this when we will go into the next presentation, which is about ethics. Also prepare an observation sheet using your AEIOU framework template, where you can create, so if you think that you would want to make notes, so your sheet should be prepared accordingly. If you think there will be a possibility that you will also make some sketches or you will stick some photographs, so plan for it and prepare your observation sheet accordingly. Now comes the sixth part. So before you start your research, you should always have a plan for how will you analyze it. So if you are collecting qualitative analysis, if you are collecting qualitative data, then all qualitative analysis has to be preceded with creating a transcription of all sessions wherever there has been an audio based recording. Then we will follow certain processes which are called as open coding. Then we will do the affinity diagram, we will create personas and journey maps, and then we will extract actionable insights which are important for our design process. There are several tools available to do that also. If it was quantitative data collection, then you have to decide the statistical analysis that you will be doing. The statistics will have two parts. First will be the descriptive statistics, where you try to describe your findings. So your findings might be described like, I had interviewed 100 participants, 50% of them were male, 40% of them were female, and 10% preferred not to declare. 20% of the participants were very satisfied with the interface, 10% were very unsatisfied with it. So these are descriptive statistics, which they are describing the data that you collected. Now you will also have to do some kind of inferential statistics. The purpose of inferential statistics is to identify whether there is a relationship between two variables, whether there is a cause and effect relationship, and whether you can group certain things into clusters. So let's say, for example, if I see that a lot of people who are trying to browse on e-commerce websites around the middle of the night, they have a high rate of abandoning their cart. So I saw a correlation between these two variables. How did I identify it? By using inferential statistics. Now I have to see whether they have a cause and effect relationship. So it is midnight browsing which causes this, or whether there are many other parameters in between. So there was something else because of which at midnight they were doing this browsing. So they might have not actually intended to buy anything. They were just browsing for the fun of it, or because they were not sleepy. So there was no direct cause and effect relationship between the time and this, but there were other mediating factors. So that can also be figured out through statistics. In order for you to figure that out, first you will have to have hypothesis and you have to have the right kind of questions. That's why it is very important, before going into collecting the data, you should know what you want to do with the results that is going to come out of it. So there are several softwares to do this quantitative analysis. You can use SPSS, R, Python, and even Google Analytics to do the same. So to summarize, and let's say we take the context of a fitness app to understand all of these different things. So I am a startup and I redesigning the fitness tracking app after noticing that 60% of users churn within the first month. So for 1 month they are using it, after that they are leaving it, 60% of them. So my objective over here is to understand why these new users stop using the app within 30 days. So what kind of methods I can use? I can do some kind of in-depth interviews. So I can do these in-depth interviews with people who are abandoning it and also people who are not abandoning it. So I can understand the motivational differences between them. I will do this in-depth interview with few of the users, and I can conduct a survey with all my active users to understand why did they opt to keep going ahead with it and why did they opt to leave the system. Then I will do a selection of the participants. So let's say I select 10 churned users and I will do 200 active users for survey validation, that okay, the things which resulted in others to drop out was not the case within this other 200 people who are still active users. Then comes the protocol. How will I do all these things? So I will use the AEIOU mapping and I will create my observation or questionnaire setting. So I will create my semi-structured interviews using this particular AEIOU guidelines. Then I will decide what kind of materials do I need. I need a screener questionnaire, I need a consent form, I need some kind of interview guidelines. I might also require the SAUS questionnaire to understand the satisfaction level of people with the app that I have designed. Maybe my app is not good enough and that's why people are leaving it. Then I have to have an analysis plan. For all the qualitative data that I collect, I will have to do some thematic analysis, create some personas, journey maps, and for all the surveys that I collected, I will have to do some statistical analysis, bring both the data together, the qualitative and quantitative, and do something we call as triangulation. So we are supposed to validate, okay, I find something from here and I find something from here and both the data match with each other. So this is how your research plan checklist would look like. So your research questions are well defined. Okay, so I am good to go to the next step. My methods are justified and appropriate. Then you see whether your participant selection criteria is well documented or not. Then you will say, okay, yes, my protocol and guide are all in place. Then you have to check whether consent and ethics have been addressed or not. Then you have to see, is my analysis approach already decided or not? Then you have to see what is my timeline and logistics and if everything is available. And then you go into conducting these user research. So a well-planned study is half done. That is how it is said. The other half is just listening genuinely with curiosity to your users and you get what you need to get. So the key takeaways from this particular lecture are: start with the whys. Every study begins with a clear research question tied to a product decision. Then you have a 6-step framework where you first start setting up the objectives, then select the methods, the participants, the protocol setting, the materials that are required, you gather them, and then you set up an analysis plan. Use the AEIOU framework to understand what kind of questions you should ask, what kind of observations you need to do. Always plan first all the 6 steps and then go for execution. So that brings us to the end of this particular lecture. See you in the next one. These are the references for you to go through if you are interested to learn more about it. Thank you.